Well, howdy hey, welcome to this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. It's a 10th episode, which, if you've been following us long enough, you know that means it's time for a fan-submitted MOCs episode. Even though we're doing a Bismuth Christmas at the moment, I'ma still keep up that tradition, so today we've got 10 fan-submitted MOCs for your viewing pleasure. As you know, with the Bionicle Inspiration Series, we like to showcase MOCs from the Bionicle community to inspire you to build some cool stuff. So let's begin. So the first MOC we've got today is Venandi, Great Spirit of Hunting and Competition by Megalodan Richards. So snake designs are pretty cool, not something you see every day as well. A pretty cool rock and snake lady here. There deserve to be more cool rock and snake ladies out there. And this is a fine example of it. I really like the Zesk mask that this MOC has. For some reason, I think it works very, very well with this snake body, kind of the combination of the little pincers on the mask, the multiple eyes. It's just something that works super well with the aesthetic there. So I think it's a really nice mask choice. And honestly, having the right mask choice can really make or break a MOC. I think that's really, really works quite well here. I like a lot of the part spamming that's also happening on here. We've got a whole bunch of these Skrull armor pieces here that came on the Vorok set. So they've got this beautiful kind of marbled brown and tan look to them. And just repeating them throughout this design here works really well. I always find that's just a clever thing to do, is just to kind of repeat a part multiple times on a MOC, just so that there's a nice sense of cohesion, a nice sense of flow throughout the MOC. You know, all these pieces kind of work together as one to form the larger MOC. And this is a really beautiful example of that. Of course, as well, when you look at a snake, you know, they have that very consistent texture throughout. They're just this sort of long cylinder, for lack of a better term. And kind of repeating a part like that and kind of making these multiple segments to form, you know, like a snake tail. Doing a bit of part spamming for that, I think, is a really good way of doing that, because then it actually does look like this one long, cohesive body or tail of a snake. And that's kind of what I was saying before about the elements of cohesion and flow. And that's just as simple as repeating a piece. So whether you have a whole bunch of one piece and you can put that into a MOC, or maybe you're going to be doing a Lego order soon on Lego.com or on Bricklink or something, and you go, hey, yeah, maybe it's time I invest in a whole bunch of one piece, and that could be the way to approach this. So something to think about. This MOC also has some fantastic poses. You would have seen me, putting up some of the pictures here of how much this MOC can pose. Megalodan has done a great job with that. He even said in the description here that it used to have a... Let me just check the email so that I'm factually correct. He said, originally I did have the Cobra sort of hood thing, but that was way too heavy and it restricted articulation, so I went for a rattlesnake look instead. I think it's really cool and interesting to note, you know, the idea of doing that, of if posability is really important to you on a MOC, sacrificing certain aspects because it's limiting posability, and then maybe approaching it from a different look or a different light or a different way or direction, and instead saying, yeah, that might be the better way to do it, just so that it can be more posable, you know. Because that's often what gets in the way of posability is, you know, over-armoring something or introducing new elements that just limit the movement of the joints, or could just limit the entire MOC in general in it moving. So I think it's an interesting little look into his process, and just an interesting thing to keep in mind when you're building as well, for sure. But overall, this is a really, really solid, really cool, well-designed MOC. Really nice work, Mr. Megalodan. Let's move on to the next one. So this MOC is Mecha Pahrak by SR388. So of course, Pahrak is the brown Borok. Fun little toy, of course, and this is a revamp of that. And I think this is a really solid revamp as well. I like this very different take. The arms are very different. The head design itself is also quite different. It almost kind of looks like it's got more of a sort of larger jaw, almost kind of larger eyes as well. And I don't know, it kind of looks a little bit like a Power Rangers villain or something. It's a really different take on the concept and on the toy. And I like that. I'm always actually quite a big fan of when people do that. They take the original concept of a Bionicle set and then they add their own light to it. They really change it up in some fashion and add their own unique flair to it. They kind of honor the past in some way, but do also embrace the future. And I like that. I like that a lot. I think this MOC is a really good example of that as well. I love the approach that he's done with the hand here as well. The fact that the wrist is kind of being built off of that really cool Mutanui sort of sword shield piece, and how that kind of forms the wrist, and then some of the other attachments on that sort of eventually flow off into a hand there. So it kind of gives this really interesting take on kind of these kind of wrist blades of sorts. It's just a very funky and out there design, not something you see every day, but a really fun way of approaching a weapon. I actually really enjoy how he's used a green mutter head under the kind of Borok shield kind of headpiece there. And that kind of looks a little bit like a green Krana, Borok piece. I like that a lot. It kind of, some of the texture of that specific part, it almost looks a little bit like a brain or something. And I kind of like that slight reimagining of the concept of a Krana inside a Borok. It looking a lot more like a brain, like something kind of out of some weird science fiction movie or something. I think that's really a really fun spin, which is still reasonably close to the original thing, but it's cool. It's just a fun little addition. And a really nice use of the piece as well. So a really unique and interesting take on a really cool toy. So nice work. The next mock is Skeksis by Hongjin Yun. So this mock is a really, really nice example of using cloth and using it in a very different way to how we kind of traditionally see. I've been on record before saying that I love it when mocks use kind of cloth elements on them because it kind of adds this nice level of depth to a mock, and often it just looks... It just can improve a mock in some really interesting ways. Take a look back at some of the other episodes where I've spoken about cloth, and you'll see. I don't necessarily need to elaborate now. But this mock uses a lot of cloth in funky and out there different colours. Often your cloths come in black. A whole bunch of the Star Wars CCBS sets have them in black, and some of the original cloth elements from Bionicle sets were black as well. But this mock here uses some funky Ninjago sail pieces. No, they weren't sail pieces. I believe they were dragon wings from this old... Ninjago Dragon. Kind of uses some of the... Now, I want to say that's brown. There's some slightly different lighting on these images, but it also uses some brown cloth, but that could just as easily be dark red cloth. And a few other cloth elements there. Some other black cloth elements as well, but I want to specifically focus on the funky colored cloth here. So I love how it kind of creates this really interesting sense of this sort of wicked witch, evil kind of shaman, which has these... This really beautifully coloured cloak, kind of cloth element on her, and whether that's just she has a very funky, interesting, multicoloured, garment of some sorts, or it's just sort of continuing to reflect kind of the mystical, magical powers that they can have, or just that they're a little bit more of an eccentric character that wears brightly coloured clothing, or just has interesting kind of almost like a tie-dye effect to some degree. It's really, really unique. And the way that the cloth has kind of been shaped over the arms, it looks like this very sort of long-sleeved cloth, similar to like a Jedi or a Sith or something. Really, really cool. Really, really nice use of cloth. And the way that that's been combined with various chains and things really helps to create this sort of evil shaman look. And then little bits of armor as well put on there. Looks fantastic. The CCBS Ultra Build Chima sets, of course. We have one of the heads from one of those sets being used here, and it's used very well. Pretty much all of those Chima sets, man, had some really, really nice headpieces, and they're kind of almost underused to some degree. So if you've got some, why not play around with them? Because this mock here has a shining example of how nice those can look, and in combination with the cloth, the two just go very, very well together. Also like the kind of slight mane that the vulture head has behind it, using a whole bunch of different claw pieces. Kind of looks a little bit like the feathers around a vulture's neck or something like that. Or it could just be, she's got a funky scarf on or something. It could be a whole bunch of different things, but really, really like that. So there's a lot going on here, and it's beautiful. And I've said it before as well, if you're using cloth on a mock, you can kind of cover up a few things. So who knows what the, underneath the cloth, who knows what it looks like there. It could just be a very simple bare-bone frame, and the cloth just kind of covers that up. Nothing wrong with doing that if you want to do so, or you could build a fully fledged mock underneath it. But if it's just covered up by cloth, well, you could always hide it. There's nothing wrong with that. You could do all sorts of interesting structural stuff that kind of keeps the cloth in its specific place as well, where, if you could actually see it, it wouldn't look that pretty, but because the cloth is being covered up, you could put, Technic beams or lightsaber rods or stuff that's kind of holding the cloth in place. That's another thought as well. But yeah, this is a fantastic mock. Nicely done. The next mock that we've got is Battlecat by Battlecat. So I like the fact that this mock kind of localizes the gold in very specific areas here. We specifically see it as kind of gauntlets, and kind of creates this really interesting look of, just a character that gauntlets are, just maybe a part of their fighting style. Like they're a bit more of a melee-based fighter, and so they do a lot of punching and deflecting with their gauntlets and stuff. And so, kind of localizing the color scheme on a specific area of the mock here could lead to a little bit of a story elements, or maybe they just have a really cool kind of gauntlet aesthetic that looks really nice. And so that's some interesting color blocking there. I just think it's interesting to note that the mask here is yellow, which is, to my knowledge, the only yellow part on this mock. There might be a few other little details and little greebles or little interesting tidbits that I'm missing there, but for the most part, it's primarily the largest area that has yellow on the mock. But yet, it very much is complemented by the gold. You know, yellow and gold are colors that are quite close to each other on the kind of color spectrum, the color wheel, or just in terms of, you know, hue and saturation, all those funky terms. And if that's the case, you have a cool mask that's one color, but you don't really have any other parts that exist in that color, or parts that you're just low on that specific color of part. But you really want to use that mask, or you really want to use a specific piece. Well, maybe there's a part that exists that's of a similar color that you could use as well, and so that way it's not going to look out of place on the mock. It could still be kind of nicely complemented to some degree. So play around with your colors, play around with what pieces you've got, see what works. Just play around with it, see what happens, because this here is a cool example of how well that yellow fits in with the gold, and nothing really stands out, nothing looks too over the top or anything. It just works well. This mock, of course, is a little bit more heavy on the custom limbs, not really using any prefab elements, but that's fine, yeah? It's a really nice aesthetic and a nice design, and always a cool way to approach a more sort of Toa-focused build. This is really cool. Nice job, Battlecat. This next mock is by Rekill and is called Unit 1.0. So really enjoy the asymmetry on this mock. One arm is sort of more armoured and natural, and the other arm is this really interesting kind of almost skeleton-like arm design. So whether or not they've been cursed or something, and the arm is a little bit more disfigured, or it's more made more as like a robot arm or something, I don't know, but it's a really, really cool look. And it just kind of takes the mock down a different direction, takes it to another level, you know? As cool as a symmetrical mock is, playing with your asymmetry there is also a really cool idea, and something to at least think about. Of course, you don't have to be asymmetrical with a mock, but it definitely makes it look more interesting, so something to consider. I like the mask choice on this mock too, using a skull spider mask there, but putting it so that because the skull spiders kind of have that little bit of a face on them, but the use of this mask here is intentionally putting it a different way. And then there's claws on all the different attachments on it, and it kind of is almost forming a little bit of a crown to some degree, which is a really interesting look. So it's cool to see that skull spider mask being used in a different way, and in a way that works, in my opinion. I think it's pretty cool. And here again we see another great use of a cape, but this time it's just sort of more as a little bit of a dress, and we can see, well, not necessarily a dress, even just kind of like a waistcoat of some kind. It works well though. And we also sort of see just how it's attached, just kind of finding little connection points in the waist and a few other areas there as well. And it flows very well with the rest of the mock, and adds a lot to it as well. So that's pretty cool. But on to the next mock. This is called The Furnace, and it's by Lego David. So this is another more unique mock, and I really like it. The idea of actually making kind of accessories or little set pieces or little additions that could aid a set or aid a mock, and just kind of, you can tell a little bit of a story with it, or just, you can kind of play with it in some fashion. So the idea here of little Matoran friend here making his disc, putting it in the furnace, getting it heated up, and then heading on home because he's all done. I quite like that a lot. I think it's fun. And the idea of playing with some of your system pieces and building little set pieces, like whether it's a furnace like this, or you could even just build a little table and chairs for your Bionicle to sit at, or you could build a whole shop front or something, who knows. It's a fun little thing to do. And heck, if you're somebody who doesn't really use system, but you have a whole bunch of system pieces lying around, maybe that's something you could use them for, is building little set pieces or little accessories for a Bionicle. It's a fun thing to do. Really nice technique on this one, using a whole bunch of 1x4 plate pieces here, and not actually fully connecting them, and doing it so that they form this beautiful arch. And that's something to remember, whether it's with Bionicle pieces or system pieces, you don't always have to fully connect a piece. You could argue that it's illegal and putting a little bit of stress on the mock here, but nothing inherently wrong with that. It still looks cool, you know? But if you're someone who wants to be fully legal with your techniques and stuff, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Of course you can do so, but here's another option you can consider, because you can create some really, really cool stuff with it. So play around with that next time you're building a mock. Can you connect a part but not fully connect it, and see if that could lead down some interesting routes or pathways, and see what you can do, see what happens, play around. So yeah, a fun, very different mock. Really cool to have on the show. Really, really clever. This next mock is Veccor, and it is by The Watching Relic. So placing a tumor mask upside down like this, I know I don't mean tumor like Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, where it's not a tumor. Tumor is in the kind of bad guy set from early Barra Magna days. Placing that mask kind of upside down like this, and then building an interesting kind of head crest coming out of it, works really well, because the mask naturally kind of has these spikes that come out of the mouth, and then when you flip it upside down, it kind of becomes this almost like a crown of sorts. So kind of expanding on that even more, kind of making it look a little bit like a reindeer with antlers or something. It's really unique and really cool. And I think there's another really beautiful kind of texture thing happening here. This MOC itself, all of the textures are very smooth. But this kind of crown bit here is a little bit more detail focused. So it kind of looks like he's wearing a crown, like it's not a part of his body. He's placed that on top as like an accessory or an item of clothing. Then we take a look at the chest, and again, there's a very similar texture there with what appears to be some sort of like armor to some degree, and it's a very similar texture to the crown. So a lot of this MOC is that more smooth texture, and then on top of those textures are the more rougher, kind of gruffer, kind of crown-like textures that are on the chest armor and this head here. So I think it's really clever. The idea of not having, of the smoother textures very much representing the body of this MOC, and the rougher textures representing what goes on top of it. It's a very clever way of kind of layering your textures, so there isn't any confusion in the MOC when you're building it. It's very clear what is a part of the MOC and what isn't a part of it. That's just more natural, more realistic. It's what it would be like in the real world. It's like you're not going to see any metal bits inside your skin. You're going to see the metal bits on top of your hand that forms a metal gauntlet or something like that. Just clever. Some really nice texture play going on there. And of course, this MOC is primarily black to my knowledge, unless I'm missing something, but I'm 99% sure I'm not. This MOC is 100% black. And black's a great color to use. It's just a very common color. You get a lot of it. You probably have a lot of it already. So the idea of using it just to make anything, and not even adding any other colors to it. That way you don't have to worry too much about your color blocking or whether or not you've got too much of a color or whatever. Sometimes just building purely in black is good. And sometimes you hear people who are like, man, you only build in black, that's boring. Who cares? If you're having fun and you get to make a cool MOC, do it. You probably already have a lot of black as well. Why not put it to use and build something with it, even if it is just a pure black MOC? Because like we see here with the Watching Relics MOC here, it looks pretty snazzy. So that's nice. It's really nice work. Next MOC here is by Iceman, and this MOC did not have a name in the submission, but I'm going to call him Fireman because, wow, I think it's pretty obvious. This MOC's got a lot of CCBS in it. Some bits aren't CCBS, but that's okay. Always cool to see a more CCBS-focused MOC, of course, with little bits of, your older Bionicle pieces in there. I don't know, it just brings joy to my heart because CCBS is pretty cool. It's always nice to see a very CCBS-focused MOC. This MOC also as well seems to mainly use pieces from the G2 Tahu. You can kind of see some of those pieces specifically on the torso and just in the golds and the reds. But also little elements of the Captain Phasma Star Wars Ultra Build set as well. We can see the torso piece being used in the shield and other little bits of silver thrown in other places as well. Of course, like I said, there's a few other pieces thrown in there as well, but it seems like he's owned a couple of those Tahu sets. You can see two of those chest pieces there on this MOC's chest. It seems that he might have had one or two of them. And that kind of brings a thought to my mind of the fact of nothing wrong with buying multiple of a set, especially now if you're in the Americas or anywhere else. Sometimes you can find Bionicle sets on clearance pretty cheap, or at charity shops pretty cheap as well. And you might go like, oh, I've already got that set though, I don't want to buy it. Well, why not buy another one? And then that way you get even more of the pieces from that to play with. And additionally as well, you've got, kind of like we were talking before with like texture spamming and stuff, now you have double of that part. So you can get really kind of cohesive, consistent MOCs that have very similar textures, very similar shapes and sizes to them. So it's not a bad idea to do that, to play around with multiple of one or two sets. It's a good idea, I reckon. I think this MOC does it well. So like the fact this MOC's feet are those Onawa claw pieces. It's just a clever design and works well. Also like this big old shield and some of the cool edits that he's done here with some of these images. Very, very nice. Always cool to see a big old Titan MOC with a really, really nice shield. Hey, I was talking about shields in an episode not long ago and just how cool they were. So there you go. Always cool to see a shield. I don't know how I suddenly got obsessed with shields. I haven't even started playing Pokemon Shield yet. Or Sword. So I can't even blame it on that. But shields are rad, apparently. So there you go. We're slowly discovering that Ben is obsessed with shields for some reason that I can't even explain yet. But it's pretty cool on this MOC. Nicely done. This next MOC is Flowly Gungus by Folisk. This is a very interesting aquatic looking creature. Kind of seems like some kind of cute two-headed crab dude of some sort. He's got these cool little pincers on his teeth there that look great. These awesome antennae that are just simply done with some flex tube. Flex tube is such a good piece and works well as some antenna here. Of course, this MOC is built on some sort of computer program, whether it's Lego Digital Designer, the Bricklink Lego Building Software Studio, or L-Draw, or any other kind of program that I'm forgetting about. Nothing wrong with building digitally like that. You can get a lot of interesting possibilities with that. Like, a lot of the pieces here you see don't come in these colors. And also when you're playing on the digital realm like that, you can do some interesting stuff with... you can kind of build in ways that you physically couldn't build in the real world, like kind of shoving a piece inside another piece that just wouldn't work in real life, but because it's on a computer, you can get away with it, kind of thing. And if that's the route you want to go down, if you really want to kind of stretch the limits and see what kind of crazy, weird things you can do, it's a pathway you can take. It's the other thing about building animals in general. You know, a lot of animals can have very specific aesthetics, but when you start to go into more aquatic creatures, or underwater creatures and stuff, you can really get into the realm of crazy, weird combinations. You know, you could have, like this mock has, crazy little pincers, big old teeth, long antenna, multiple legs, and it still makes sense. Yeah, that's not to say you couldn't have a land creature that has all sorts of that stuff, but if you even look in the real world, outside of the Bionicle world and Bionicle lore and stuff, there's some crazy, weird-ass fish that exist that have, just like I said, big old teeth, big antlers, weird glowing things that come out of their head, they're luminescent, they have multiple legs, and that's just one creature. So kind of doing that, if you really want to stretch the limits and come up with some crazy, interesting combination of all sorts of different things on a creature, maybe play around with some under-the-sea stuff, because you can really stretch the limits there, and it still makes sense. You know what I mean? It's not like you're going to do something that's really, really crazy, weird, and out there that you're like, I don't believe it. Suddenly, if you put it underwater, it gets a little bit more believable to some degree. Yeah? And maybe that's just my own opinion. You might be like, yeah, I don't agree with you. And that's all right. You don't have to agree with me. But it's just a thought, just something that popped in my head when I saw this mock here. And this mock's pretty cool. Nicely donezoed. Final submission that we've got today is by Poor Disadvantage, and this is Hakann. Is that how you pronounce his name? I don't actually know, because when I bought the Pahrak, when I was a wee lad, I never really called them their names. That was a weird thing with me. I remembered all the Toa's names. I never really learnt that many of the villain names. Some of them, more towards the end I did. But yeah, a lot of like the Pahrak, the Rakshi, the Vizorak, I never really learnt their names. My bad. You know, now's the time to learn. But Hakann? It sounds right. But maybe you're like, oh, Ben, there's a silent W and you don't even know about it. And then I'd be like, yeah, I don't. But yeah. It's the Red Pahrak, and this is a revamp that Poor Disadvantage has done, and it's a really sick revamp. I love what he's done. He's kept the original Pahrak spine here, but he's taken out that typical white skull that you would put inside it, and he's built this interesting custom design here, using some gears to form these teeth, and the idea of getting this CCBS armor shell on the top as this interesting like helmet over the top, kind of almost giving him this really, really effective looking awesome armor. It's such a unique and beautiful design. It's a really great way of taking the original concept and really, really jigging it up and playing with it. And also taking elements of what was originally there, but expanding upon it. Like, you know, Hakann had this really cool gun, and now he's given him this awesome gun that even has like ammo strapped to his belt. Just looks really, really cool. And additionally, he's added even more spikes on the back, give him almost like a bit of a tail, which to some degree you could argue the Pahrak had like a slight tail, but this one's a lot more pronounced and longer, and even kind of expands out a little bit. Kind of has even more little bit of like kind of almost tail feathers, which is probably not the right word, maybe more like spikes or something, but it looks cool. And additionally, I love the fact that he's introduced a bit of red into the color scheme. Of course, he's typically dark red, but these little hints of red actually work quite well. There's a lot going on here. And it's really, really cool. It's like I said before, he's honoring the original, expanding upon it in some way, and then adding his own personal touches to it, and giving it new light, but still honoring what was there before. And that's really, really cool. So a beautiful job. And a beautiful job to everyone in this episode today. Hopefully you enjoyed this Fan Submit a Mocs episode, and if you're like, man, mine wasn't on this episode, well that's okay, because it still can be. It can be on the episode if you submit it to the email you're currently seeing on your screen right now, or if you want to copy and paste that email, it is in the description below. Copy and paste that email into an email, send me some pictures, send me some information, whatever you want to include in that, you can include as many or as few pictures as you want, as little or as much information as you want, send it my way, and you'll be all good. Also, while you're there in the description, you can see the links to the mocks you saw in today's episode. Be sure to check out some of the other stuff those guys have done and continue to get inspired at what they've made. And also in the links in the description are links to my social media. You can see some of the other things that I've been building and working on over there. Be sure to check it out. Otherwise, that's it for this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. Stay tuned for episode 141 coming up soon, and also stay tuned for the next bit of the Bismuth Christmas. We'll have even more fan-submitted mocks over there. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya next episode.